Hello, my name is Ray Hughes, and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project conducted by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and administered locally by Brian Powers, who's our cameraman today, here at the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Public Library, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today is the 20th of March, 2019. And we have the privilege and honor today of interviewing a World War II veteran, Henry B. Williamson III. And Sergeant Williamson, it's a pleasure to meet you. And it'd be all right to call you Hank during the interview?
Absolutely, absolutely, Ray. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you too. Hank, if you would, the date of your birth and where you were born.
I have to confess that now?
Yes.
I was born October 22nd, 1925.
And where were you living when you were born?
I was living in Providence, Rhode Island, which is in New England, and that's basically where I grew up.
I see. And your parents' names?
My mother's name was Elizabeth Shaw, S-H-A-W. She married my dad, Henry B. Williamson Jr., and I think they were married in 1924. And then I was the first child.
What did your dad do for a living?
My dad was in the textile business. He basically was a broker. He would buy the cotton, the raw cotton from the growers. And then he would classify the cotton according to the quality and the length of the fiber and so forth, and sold the cotton to the many mills that existed especially in New England.
Yes.
And that was his basic. And he made a career out of that. And he was very effective in that line of work.
And did you have any brothers and sisters?
One sister. Her name now today is Mary Ann Harvey, and unfortunately she's failing now. She's about 2 years younger than I am. She's 91, and she's experiencing advanced knowledge and Dementia, thank you. Mm-hmm. She's dementia right now. I wanted to go and see her. She lives in Rhode Island still today, and I wanted to go and see her, but I found out that I was going to have to take a flight to Boston out of Dayton, Ohio, my current hometown, and then other arrangements and flights to Rhode Island. And I decided at 93, I just don't have the physical stamina to make a trip like that. So I sent my son from a former marriage in my stead, and he was very good friends of my sister and my family there in New England, and that was accomplished.
Did your mother work outside the home?
No, my mother never had to work outside of the home. My mother came from a very wealthy family. My grandparents. My grandfather was from Scotland, and he was a chemist. Came over to this country at age 11, and later on he developed the unique process of printing cloth, and he had a mill in Connecticut and one in Rhode Island, and it was a huge success to have that discovery and that perfection of printing cloth. And I grew up in the Depression, and most people in the Depression were lucky to earn $3,000 or $4,000 a year. He was probably making well over 100. And so our whole, especially our young years, were certainly complemented by the wealth of my grandparents.
What were their names?
their name was, my grandfather was Alexander Fraser Shaw, S-H-A-W, and my grandmother. And they...
And her name?
Well, we called her Gabi. I can't really tell you what her actual first name was. We called her Gabi, who was a marvelous woman, and she was very, very generous with her wealth, which it was hard to forget those times.
Yes.
Every Christmas night they would have exchange of gifts for the adults at the so-called house, and that was where they lived. And my Uncle Norman was out of work for a long time, and his car would hardly run. And so, lo and behold, he gave Uncle Norman, my grandmother gave Uncle Norman a little box. And in that box were the keys to a brand new car. It was such a, because my Aunt Alice, Norman's wife, went into tears, and my grandmother said, "No crying, you've got to have wheels, and now it's time for coffee and cake." And Merry Christmas. That's the way she was, very matter of fact, but her heart was as big as this building.
You made a gesture of the house. What do you mean by that?
Well, that was the meeting place for all the... My grandmother and grandfather had 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys. One of the girls was my mother. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of the meeting place. Where are we going for Thanksgiving? Or where are we going to? Going to the house. That was the place to be. And it was a huge house. And it was the place to go. I think at Christmas time she had at least three Christmas trees. She had one in the basement, had one in the formal living room, one in the second floor living room as well, and they were all professionally trimmed by professional Christmas tree people. And one in the sunroom had a train that went around the tree all day long until you shut it off, you know. These were some of the amenities that we enjoyed as young children. And when you have that kind of an environment, you think, well, everybody's rich, you know, everybody's wealthy. But that was not the case, because especially during the Depression years, yeah. Everything was...
What about your dad's parents?
Well, my dad's parents were from Houston, Texas. That was Henry B. Williamson Sr., and he was a successful man. He was not overly wealthy, but very, very stable. And we didn't see them as often as the ones right there close to home in New England. But we saw them periodically, and that was in the old South. And my grandfather took me fishing down to Galveston, Texas, where my father was born. And we'd leave, and it was still dark. You know, we'd drive to Galveston, and we'd stop for breakfast. And here I am sitting at the counter with my grandfather having breakfast, and he had a houseboy named Sam. And I said, "Well, where's Sam? How come he's not sitting?" "Oh, well, Sam, he's eating in the kitchen," which was the color separation back in those old days of the South. But
how did your mother and father meet? Do you recall?
Because you're getting into these tough questions. Where did they meet? Okay. My mother was from Connecticut, Norwich, Connecticut. My dad was from Texas. And I think they met at a dinner party that somebody gave in Connecticut.
This sounds like the beginning of the movie Giant.
Well, not intentionally, but they met. Let's say they met in Connecticut, and they had this beautiful table of invited guests, and wearing tuxedos and so forth, and the waiter came around to ask my mother, what kind of coffee would Julie want? Coffee, ma'am? And my mother said, yes, I'd like to have a demi-tasse. And so the waiter, he kind of scratched his head and said, demi-tasse? Well, ma'am, I tell you what, I'll bring you a cup and saucer and a pot of coffee, and you can put anything you want in it. which was, he didn't know what demi-tasse meant, which I think is French, meaning small cup.
Thank you. I didn't want to show my ignorance.
That's a translation.
Thank you.
Demi-tasse. So they met there, and one thing led to another. In fact, one time my dad took me to the house where they were living, when my mother was living before they got married, and kind of asked the owners, can we look around? This is where your mother was living when we were courting. It was on Crescent Beach, I think, in wherever that is, in Connecticut. And that was kind of a good experience for my father.
Sure.
To go back to that. We always want to go back to the way it used to be.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a tendency of all of us. What schools did you go to?
What schools?
Grade school and.
Well, I remember I went to a grade school, a regular grade school, and my wealthy grandparents invited us one particular year when I was still in grade school to visit their new home that they purchased in Bermuda. So we went to Bermuda, and we wound up staying there for a whole year in Bermuda. I went to a Catholic convent because it was the only good school on the island of Bermuda. And my homeroom teacher was Sister Joan of Arc. And we called her, we couldn't pronounce that, so it was Sister Joan of Fox was our teacher. And I used to send these little notes up to this English girl in the front of the classroom with little comments like, well, let's meet after school, let's go swimming after school. And she caught me one day, and she came back to the rear of the classroom and hit my nails rather painfully. We don't send notes. Okay. All right. But that was when we went to Bermuda. And then it wasn't long after that, when I reached the 7th grade, it was made possible that I could go to military school starting in the 8th grade. I started at the 8th grade in Manlius Military School in Manlius, New York, which was right near Syracuse. And I spent 5 years there, Ray. Went from the 8th grade to the 12th. I graduated from high school in 1944. And wasn't long after that I entered college. I qualified for college and finished one semester of pre-med. I was originally going to be a doctor.
What college?
Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, which is an Ivy League school.
Right.
And it wasn't long after the finish of my first year of pre-med, I was drafted into World War II. I had previously been offered to go into the Marines, but I chose to take what they call a college deferment to continue my education. But the Lord had other plans for me. He had me drafted in World War II, and that was in August 1944, which was late in World War II.
Yeah. Where did you go when you got your notice?
Got my notice, and I kind of was excited at 18 years old. I said, Mom, I got a letter from the White House. It says greetings. So, ha ha ha. I was whisked off to basic training in Macon, Georgia, which is about halfway to Atlanta, and took 13 weeks of infantry basic training.
What camp was that?
Camp Wheeler, which is now gone. I've since visited Macon, it's gone. And then I went in basically as a fat teenager into the Army in basic training, and I came out looking like a thermometer. You know, they really put you through it. And my mother said, "Well, they're starving you to death. You can't starve to death." Mom, they're not starving me. And I introduced her to my drill sergeant, and she came on base, and I introduced her to my drill sergeant. And first question out of her mouth, a typical mother's question: "Are these boys getting a good breakfast every morning and orange juice?" "Oh, Mom, don't go into that." Typical mother. "Oh, yeah, this man, wow." Did he say yes? Yeah, he said yes. But that was in basic training. After that was over, we were sent home for a pass, and we were living outside of Boston, so I went back to Boston, and I went to dinner with my mother and father and my sister Mary Ann. First question out of my mother's mouth: "Well, you're not going overseas, are you?" And I looked her back straight in the face. "Of course not," because I was trained not to say any yes, or because loose lips sink ships, you know, that kind of thing. And but my dad knew. He knew I was going, and I wound up getting on a converted luxury liner, the Ile de France. It was called the Ile de France.
Out of
Boston. Got on that. We were going overseas, going across the Atlantic.
You remember the date or the month?
I would say it was probably fall
Of 1944?
Fall of 1944. And they were that ship was so crowded. They had 14,000 people on board that troop ship. And the accommodations were terrible, the food was terrible, everything was terrible. We took saltwater showers. You ever take a shower in salt water? Don't do it. And so that was, it took us, I think it took us over a week or longer to cross the Atlantic. And we almost got hit by a German submarine. And it missed us and hit a aircraft carrier. And here it is, the sun is rising, there's the aircraft carrier, and there's a giant hole in the side of the aircraft carrier, which was still afloat because it's such a big ship. But my bunk I forgot to mention that my bunk in the troop ship was in the swimming pool. And unfortunately, they had bunks in the swimming pool because the water was turned off, and I kept worrying all night. I couldn't sleep at night because I was worried somebody was going to turn that water on. I didn't want to get wet. But it was, and I won a lot of money on that crossing playing blackjack. But I was so nervous about what I was going to be doing eventually. I was so worried about the war. It didn't matter. And my mother cried when they sent all my civilian clothes back in a box. Because I had a new wardrobe then.
Yeah. You remember the name of the aircraft carrier? That was it?
No, it was big. The big aircraft carrier.
So they were torpedoed.
And they sustained that hit from that German submarine. But it would have sent us directly to the bottom of the ocean. And we landed in England. He asked me earlier that I don't know exactly where, at the main port in England. We spent several days there with final preparation and training for being in the war. This is all before the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
We crossed the English Channel on an LST, which was a Navy ship.
LST?
LST, landing ship tank,
Tank.
something, LST.
Right.
And those Navy people were so gracious and so supportive and so friendly. They knew where we were going.
Yeah.
They knew where we were going, and they gave us their bunks and their best food and their best everything. And it took it forever to cross the English Channel, which is not that wide, because of all the mines and all the explosives that we could have bumped into and demolished our LST. We finally, I don't know what it took 2 or 3 days to cross the English Channel, which is unheard of. We finally got to Lahar of France. That's where we docked. And we said goodbye to our Navy friends. And I remember my comment at the time, why wasn't I in the Navy? Anyway, and guess what? This is late December '44 when we finally got over there, Lahar, France. That's when the Bulge hit. That's when the Germans broke through our lines. We thought the war was all over. We had it all nice and tidy and put to bed, you know. No, they broke through our lines, and that was the Battle of the Bulge. And that breakthrough cost us about another 6 months of combat. And most of us were, when they went into combat for the first time, and I was assigned my unit because I was sent over as a replacement. I didn't know who I was going to be, what unit I was going to be. I was assigned to the 69th Infantry.
When you got at Le Havre?
Got to Lahar. That's the patch on my left shoulder, and 69th Infantry was part of the 1st Army. And
so you're assigned to the 69th Infantry?
69th Infantry. And most of us, when we went into combat for the first time, were about 19 years old. We had a guy in our squad who was 38. You know what we called him? The old man.
Yeah.
He was twice our age. But I think he was regular Army. He wasn't drafted. He was RA, regular Army. That was his career. And I guess his assignment, well, okay, we got the Battle of Bulge assignment for go. And so he was there with us. And there'd been so much rain and so much bad weather. It seemed like the whole geography of France was like a big chocolate pudding. We were up to our waist in mud, and even the food tasted like mud. And I accused the chef, the cook. I said, "Why are you serving this? It's not mud. It's real food. It's a mud." It said it. Oh, okay. So just checking. And so it wasn't until 6 months later that the war was officially over, in May of 1945. So I was 19 during all of this, and one of the toughest part of the Bulge, the enemy obviously, because we were busy trying to stay alive, but the weather was so brutal, it was so cold, it was so terrible, and we didn't have the proper clothes to keep ourselves warm, and we had our foxhole buddies, and we dug a bunch of foxholes, and the buddies said it was good because you had somebody to help keep you warm, you know, and so that was we had two problems: the enemy and the weather. And sleeping in the snow is no fun, and there were, I think, at least one time they pulled us off the line, and went back. This giant tent. Inside were hot showers and real soap and things like that. We were pulled off the line, and I think they burned our clothes because we didn't know you didn't take your clothes off regularly. You didn't brush your teeth regularly either. I think we brushed our teeth a lot of times with cigar ashes. Hey, cigar ashes works. Try it. And so this was life in the war, and we had Remember, we had an all-night march. And here we are marching in the middle of the night to our next objective. And the morale was very low. Everybody was saying, who called this all-night march? What are we marching to? Where are we going? And we had this older man in our group. And we kept complaining and bitching and so the next day, after everything was okay, and we had a hot meal, and we got reoriented about what are we really doing here. This older man who didn't identify himself in our group, he had no rank on. He was the lieutenant colonel, and he said, "Is everything all right now, man?" "Oh, yes, sir. Everything is wonderful." He was the guy we were complaining and bitching about around him, not knowing who the heck he was. And I guess one of the biggest helps we had in the war was when we'd go in to take an objective of a town or village, we were preceded by tanks. And they would take a lot of we'd literally hide behind those tanks to protect from any injury. And we had one guy, he was so scared he shot himself in the hand, so he'd get called back to the medics, to the hospital. I didn't quite understand that, but hey, fear is fear.
Right.
And probably the most fearful I ever became in my life is when we went to the front for the first time, the real front. And the first thing, we had a whole bunch of the enemy who would give themselves up. Coming on, I love you, coming on. Don't shoot me, I'm coming on. Which was typical because they knew we were green troops. They knew we were scared, and they wanted to take full advantage of that edge. But the next thing is, here's a dead American, as white as a sheet. Here's a dead enemy, white as a sheet, and it suddenly hits you right between the eyes. This is the real thing. No more training, no more preparation, no more boot camp, no more this, no more that. That could be me in 5 seconds or less. That, talk about fear that grips you like this is the real thing, you know. You think about your family, you think about your mother and father, your friends and everything. Here you are. It's all over now. This is the way it's going to be. And I had a lot of friends killed in that first encounter we had. The Germans had pillboxes. They holed up in these pillboxes. And good luck to take over one of those pillboxes. And
those pillboxes were concrete enclosures.
Concrete enclosures, and some of them were pretty posh. They were big, and they had places to cook things and what have you. But that was their forte. That was their advantage. In you're out there all by yourself. And I remember there was one pillbox that after all effort, they took care of most of them. But the one pillbox that was really tough, we call it the Grand Hotel. Did anyone take the Grand Hotel yet? No. But obviously I survived that. A lot of guys died of mines. This whole area was mined. The Germans, the enemy knew where to go with not stepping on a mine, but all of us didn't know. So that was the first introduction to the Bulge. And we worked our way through all of the Ardennes. We We had Bastogne situation where the Germans tried to get us surrender because it was surrounded. You may as well give up, it's surrounded. And the German, the American general, 1 star, nuts, we ain't surrendering. That was his message. And they got it loud and clear. And we worked our way, working our way east. Headed for all roads were leading to the Berlin, and the Battle of the Rhine. We had pontoon bridges across the Rhine. We would put our trucks, get our trucks across the Rhine on pontoons. We spent one colorful, almost a week in this one hotel right on near the Rhine, and we were basically cut off from our regular unit, and we had nothing to eat. And we found out in the basement there were turnips down there and potatoes. So we literally lived on turnips and potatoes for a week. Not a balanced diet, but it's amazing what war will put you through. And we were near the Remagen Bridge, although we weren't involved as heavily on the Remagen Bridge as some of the others, many of whom were killed. So I'm trying to take you further. Battle of the Rhine. We have a medal which gave me for the Battle of the Rhine. They gave me a medal for everything. That's why I have so many medals. I'm really not that important.
Well, you have a combat infantryman's badge.
The combat infantryman's on top. I was more thrilled about getting the combat infantryman's badge than anything.
Everybody that got one expresses the same.
Yeah. I mean, it was a symbol of whatever. It was you were a main person, then you were important.
Absolutely.
Had ways to make you feel important. So.
From the Rhine, where did you go?
Well, from the Rhine. Toward the end of the war were two of the most important events that were special to me. Not that there weren't other special times. I don't want to rank the times, but 2 things. Number one, it turned out we were the first American troops to meet up with the Russians on the Elbe River, E-L-B-E, Elbe River, in Torgau, Germany, T-O-R-G-A-U, Torgau, small town, and it became an official end of the World War II. The East and the West meet, the Russians and the Americans, and being a historical event, which it was, it attracted a lot of the big name brass. Eisenhower was there. Bradley was there, Patton was there, and our First Army commander was there. I had never seen him. Courtney Hodges.
Yeah.
Courtney Hodges. He was a 3-star. He was a 3-star general, and I brought with me the book of the Battle of the Bulge and his pictures in there, and all the big name generals crossed the bridge we were guarding in a regular staff car, with one exception, General Patton. He crossed the bridge in a tank because he was a tanker. And here's his head sticking out through the turret with his 3 stars. And he crossed the bridge. So I got to see him close up, but I never got to shake his hand. But he was angry then. And I found out why later. he was super angry then. Number one, he hated the Russians. Number two, he had previously been assigned to take Berlin. And guess what? The politicians pulled him back, and they gave the taking of Berlin to the Russians. And that made him absolutely furious.
Very true, yes.
What a guy. I was so glad I got to at least see him then. But he was a great soldier. Unorthodox. He and Ike didn't get along very well. Patton was a general before Eisenhower, any of those guys. He graduated from West Point several years before Ike and
Bradley,
and Marshall was a key figure in World War II. He was kind of the brains of World War II. But Eisenhower, to begin with, came from a poor family, could not afford to go to college, so here's an opportunity to get free college if I can qualify for West Point. That's exactly what he did, and he graduated. But we met the Russians. Okay, that was, because everybody was jolly. I had this one woman, Russian soldier with a machine gun on her back. She decided she wanted to give me a big hug. And guess what? She almost killed me. I mean, whoa. And if they offer you vodka, you take the vodka. You don't say no to vodka. You say yes. Yeah. So that was the first special event. The other special event was, I guess I'm using the word, best word I can think of, I was appointed as a liberator of one of the death camps. And the death camp that we liberated was Buchenwald, right near Berlin. Buchenwald, Buchenwald. And I was just 20. This was in 1945. I was 20 years old then. And a typical 20-year-old male, I was conceited. I was stuck on myself. I thought I was God's gift to the human race. And but these faces of people, men, women, and children, I looked in their eyes, and you know what I saw? I saw, finally, here's some people that are going to help us. No more torture, no more starvation, no more this. And that spotlight went from Handsome Hank to the prisoners. And the first thing we were told, don't try to feed these people any regular food. It might kill them. It might kill them. And it was hard to say no to a smiling child. Chocolat, chocolat. Well, maybe later. But the only thing they could tolerate was some kind of warm or some hot broth or soup or something, just to keep them going. And we were headed to a rehab center in another part of Europe. We had about 1,000 of them, men, women, and children. And every day they'd say, okay, we lost 2 in car number 4, and we lost 3 in car number 8. You know, they were dying on their way to the rehab. They couldn't make it any longer. The human body, I found out one thing, the human body, because I was only 19 years old, the human body is tough. The human body is tough. And so that changed my life, you know, beyond the war. And after that revelation that get the spotlight off your stupid self, Hank, put it on others. Others need help. Reach out to people. Everyone's got problems. I don't care what problems they have. They got some kind of a problem. Try to make them feel important, make them feel special. And that changed my whole life. To this day, sitting here with you, Ray, it's changed my whole life. I'm so privileged. I feel kind of like being too I don't know. I don't want to be a star anymore. I wanted to be a star for a lot of my life. I went into show business. I went into television. I met a lot of famous people. I told, what was your name again? Yeah, Pat. I told Pat that I met Marilyn Monroe in Hollywood when I did a TV show there. She asked me my name. I couldn't remember my own name. I was so excited. Let's see, dry clean only, that's it. No, I didn't say that. And there were other stars. Montgomery Clift was there that day, and who else was there? Walter Wanger, a very famous movie producer, was there, and some other people. But they're just like we are. They put on one shoe at a time, just like we do. But the key point in my my Buchenwald story is it changed my life for the better. It made me more marketable for the human race, because the world is full of stuck-up people. The world is full of people that are trying to impress people. I don't try to impress people anymore. I like real people. And then in May 8th, 1945, here I am digging another foxhole. God knows how many I dug. Hey, Hank, the war's over. Forget it. Good, come on, quit. Help me with this foxhole. No, really, it's over. That's how I found out it was over. Really? It's over? And then I had to stay in Europe a little longer because I didn't have enough points to come home. I needed so many points to qualify to come back to the United States, which makes sense. And so I was in the Army of Occupation for a while, and I've had an interesting life. I stayed in the reserve after I got out of the Army, and I stayed in the Army Reserve, and I was told, well, we'll never be called back to active duty again. Forget it, just forget it. Guess what? We went to a regular Tuesday night meeting at Rockefeller Center at NBC Studios. Well, take your seats, gentlemen. We have a special announcement to make. Oh, really? What can this be? We're going back on active duty. What? That you could hear a pin drop. Back to active duty? And as it turned out, we were all bummed out about that. We were being sent back to Europe for a psychological warfare project through the Secretary of the Army. Frank Pace was his name. He was Secretary of the Army. Frank Pace, he sent us over there. We were stationed right outside of Heidelberg, and we broadcast behind the Iron Curtain. We dropped leaflets. We interrogated a lot of personnel. Many of our men in our unit were multilingual, including the enlisted men. I speak English and German, that's it. And so they were, and we were sent, when we were sent on TDY, to some pretty famous places where, well, you're going to Paris for a week, or you're going to Rome, or you're going to wherever. We'd go in plain clothes, we wouldn't wear our uniform. It was a kind of a cloak and dagger assignment. We didn't want to feature the fact that we were military. We were actually assigned to the Signal Corps. And I guess we were part of military intelligence, but there's no such thing as military intelligence on active duty. It's only as a civilian, strictly as a civilian, or off duty. So we were military intelligence, and we were classified. The top rating was top secret, secret, down the line, according to what our job was. And I had a company commander that I reported to. James Patterson was his name. His family owned the New York Daily News, and he had been to West Point, and so he was my commanding officer, and I had to report to him. And he and I didn't get along very well for some reason. And we had a corporal in our unit, and he says, well, Sergeant, my dad is coming over, would like to take you out to dinner with me. You want to go out to dinner? So I asked my captain superior, I said, sir, Corporal so-and-so has invited me to have dinner with his dad who's coming over very soon. No, absolutely not. Well, you have better things to do than going out to dinner. Okay, that's the end of that. So I told the corporal, I said, sorry, I can't join your dad for dinner, but extend my thanks to your dad for including me in that invitation. Guess what? One thing I did not know, his dad was a 3-star general. And he shows up on the base where I was stationed outside of Heidelberg with the uncovered field showing 1, 2, 3 stars. Red background, 1, 2, 3 stars. So he comes on the base, and here's my commanding captain. Rigor mortis set in when he saw the 3 stars, He saluted with both hands. And so finally I meet Corporal Davidson's father, and he said, I'm sorry, Gates says you can't join us for dinner. I'm sorry, I was hoping that you could do that. Then here comes the captain out of the barracks. And he salutes the general again, and the general says to my commanding captain, oh, well, sorry, Hank can't join us for dinner. We're really looking for. Oh, no problem. No problem. Whoa. He saluted with 2 hands again. And we went out to dinner. I never had any more trouble with that captain.
I guess not.
No more trouble. So rank does have its privileges, Brian. I-A-N, not Y, all right. He's our cameraman, by the way. Thanks for doing the camera. It's better look good after all this. Oh, just kidding. But that's a quick summary of my experience.
What years was that you were over there with the Signal Corps?
This was in, this was after I was called back to active duty.
Right.
During the behind the curtain, Iron Curtain and all that stuff. That was in 1951. And Frank Pace, the Secretary of the Army, wanted to be closely advised of our progress on that assignment, which made it, oh, yeah, okay, let's do it right. Let's do it right. So that was during the Korean War. They sent us back to Europe.
What rank are you then?
They promoted me to my current rank.
Master
And after the.
Oh, you have a diamond in the middle there. That means first sergeant.
I was a first sergeant. I'm a master sergeant plus the time they call it a first sergeant.
Right.
Toward the end of that assignment, I was approached to keep me in the Army. They wanted to send me to OCS to become an officer, so on and so forth. And I think about that, which I obviously turned down. I'd had enough military. I'd been in military school for 5 years, World War II, and now this. I'd done enough. But I look back at it. Well, that would have been a ticket to being taken care of the rest of my life in a military environment, which is fine. I have a lot of friends who are like that, and I admire them for that. But at the time, it was not the right time for me to say yes to that, and I didn't. And
Well, tell us about your civilian life. You were mentioning, I forget where you went to, what theater for a meeting, and you were in California, I guess, when you met Marilyn Monroe.
see, that story sticks. That Marilyn Monroe has clout.
It sure does.
She's gone, unfortunately.
Yes.
But anyway, okay, let's go. Okay, I'm done with the military.
Right.
I decide. My dad suggested, well, why don't you go out and see your aunt and uncle in Houston, Texas? And I was kind of mentally exhausted, I guess, or whatever the word. And so I went to see them, and we went down to, they said, well, let's go down to Galveston, which is Texas, where my father was born in 1899. And so we're driving to Galveston. And we saw the sights, and this is where your dad was born, and da-da-da-da-da. And we're headed back to, well, let's go back to Houston to have dinner. I know a good, perfect restaurant for you. We're heading back to Houston. And we go down this little side street, and there's a big sign up here. New network television station starting soon. So Hank opens his big mouth, and, well, can we just go in, Uncle? And, sure. Look around. So to make a story very short, Ray, I don't know how many hours. We are fourth hour now.
I don't have any
okay.
time on it.
So yeah, well, I go in and look around. Long story, very short. In 4 or 5 hours, I was hired by that television network station as the program director, because I had done a lot of TV in Europe and different places. Apparently, I impressed them. I turned on my glamour personality, but anyway, they hired me as. I mean, it's a classic case of being in the right place, at the right time.
What network was it?
CBS, and I worked for CBS later. And the story continues. So we got over that, and I told my dad you what? You hired in what? Because my best hope was being a bag man at a supermarket or something. That was my first goal. But it's a classic case of being in the right place at the right time. And guess what? You know who the principal stockholder of that new TV station was? He was a Hollywood movie star, Jimmy Stewart, who turned out to be an absolute gem. He didn't make you feel like he was the big star. Not, he was Jimmy. Don't call me Mr. Stewart, I'm Jimmy. And we picked him up at the railroad station in Houston with his manager. They took a compartment all the way from Hollywood on the train because they didn't want to do this all day. And he was not appreciative of his success in Hollywood. He originally was planning to be an architect out of Princeton University, but that he got into the show business very quickly. And so we get in the car. We're going back to Galveston to the studios, and the studios had to be approved by the FCC in Galveston, not Houston. But our market was Houston. That's where the money was. So our advertising was focused on Houston. So we get in the car. We're going back to the Galveston studio, and first words out of Jimmy Stewart, "Well, it sure is flat here." Well, Mr. Stewart, not Mr. Stewart, it's Jimmy. It's flat. It's Texas. It's flat. Well, that explains that, you know. What a great guy. What a fun guy. Because we were uptight at first about meeting a famous movie star, because I'd seen a lot of his movies. And so he helped us kick off the station. What a kickoff. And we had made plans to go out to the country club after the kickoff to kind of celebrate. And we'd had a limousine, we had motorcycle police ready to take us to the country club. And Jimmy takes one look at this. Oh, we have to go to all this fanfare? Well, we made all these plans, and okay, well, let's go. Off we go to the country club. And we had trouble. We weren't on the full network yet. We hadn't been hooked up to the CBS network yet. We were doing everything on film, kinescopes, they called. And one of the kinescopes broke down. So Jimmy and I go in the studio. We start reading news off the wire, just to fill the time. Well, in Washington, so and so and so and so, and then he would take a page and he'd read a bunch of things off the wire, straight off the wire. And we had a lot of phone calls. Someone thought, because they knew Jimmy Stewart, they told my boss that Hank is a great newscaster, trying to beef me up a little bit. In contrast with Jimmy Stewart, how do you compete with that? So that was a classic case of being in the right place at the right time.
What year is that?
1953 we went on the air. And I can send you guys some copies of the press release they had on this. Yeah. And because the big news was Jimmy Stewart was the key stockholder. That got everybody's attention.
Are you single at this time?
I was single at that time.
Had you been married before or anything?
Shortly after that, I was married for the wrong reason. I married a model and an actress out in Hollywood. But that's another story. How many hours do we have, Brian?
Well,
I keep checking. Need a time check.
who was the? What was her name?
This afternoon or tomorrow? Oh.
Yeah. What was her name?
Dolores.
And her last name?
Dolores Martin.
Dolores Martin.
She was basically a model, but she did did a couple of movies.
And how did you meet her?
Met her in my travels.
You were.
No, actually, where did I meet? I met her in Texas. Met her in Dallas when I was doing a TV show in Dallas. Met her there. Went to the West Coast, but we both married for the wrong reasons.
Right. Did you have
had
any
one
children?
child by that who he lives in Miami, Florida. His name is John Williamson, and so where are we? Let's see.
Well,
back to
how long were you married then?
Only for a couple of years.
A couple of years, and you got divorced.
Divorced, and then I met my current wife in Manhattan. We both worked in Manhattan.
And her name?
Her name is Christine with a C.
Christine.
Yeah, and she's younger and prettier than I am. She's we're married 58 years coming up in August.
August what?
August 16.
Okay. And you've been married 58 years?
58 years.
So you got married in 1961.
1961. See,
Yeah.
you're sharp as a tack.
Well, I got married August 6th, 1960. But
I knew there was one other that got married on that day.
And her name again was
Christine with a C.
And her maiden name?
Christine Gill, Gill.
A good Irish girl?
Good Irish. Well, I don't know if she's Irish. I'll have to ask her. Honey, are you Irish?
Where did you meet Christine at?
In New York. We were both working in Manhattan.
But I mean, how did you meet her?
I knew you'd ask that question. Well, actually, she was one of my accounts. I was working for Remington Rand at the time. I was a salesman. Did quite well, as a matter of fact. But again, it was a case of reaching out. People felt that I made them feel important. That's what helped me in sales. They didn't forget me. But I met her in church. She was a member of to a church in Manhattan Marble Collegiate Church, whose pastor was a very famous person, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote a book called The Power of Positive Thinking.
Right.
That made him a celebrity.
Right.
And every Thursday night was singles night. And I said, well, I'll go to singles night. I'm single. I qualify for that. And so that's where I really got to know her. And she didn't like me at first. She thought I was a snob. And what she did, she mistakes snobbery for being bashful. Because I went to military school and all boys prep school. I didn't have the direct daily association with females, so I felt a little incompetent around female, a little scared. They were scary. And so later on, she found out that I was, not a snob. I was just shy. And one thing led to another, and we were married. And she was a member of Dr. Peale's church. I couldn't go in the sanctuary. I was a non-member, so I watched the service on TV in basement number 3, way down.
What was the name of the church again?
Marble Collegiate Church.
Mm-hmm.
Still a very famous church. Dr. Peale is gone.
Yes.
And we went on a retreat one weekend, and the Dr. Ruth Peale were invited, but they were late. And so when he finally arrived, he apologized for being late, and he told us why he was late. He was late because he had been approached by Lucille Ball, who was a famous actress and entertainer on television. She approached Dr. Peale to marry she and a man she wanted to marry. She wanted to be married by Dr. Peale, for whatever reason. And Dr. Peale said, well, I considered that. I knew she'd been married before to Desi Arnaz or some other people, which were part of her big TV I Love Lucy series. And I've suddenly lost where I am on this story.
She wanted Dr. Peale to marry
Dr.
her.
Peale to,
and her husband.
And he finally told us the truth. He said, I said, I'll marry you on one condition. If this is your final permanent marriage. And she honored that because she was still married upon her death. She kept that promise. He did marry them, and she kept that promise. She did not remarry again.
I forgot who she married after Desi Arnaz.
Well, he was a comedian himself. He was a comic. Mm. He was a stand-up comic. I didn't know that much. I can't even remember his name. But show business has a reputation of many marriages and so far. I saw Mickey Rooney on television the other day. He had 7 wives. Yeah. Did you know that? Mickey, he was about that tall. Yeah. Great entertainer.
Did you know Mickey, or had you ever?
I met a lot of famous stars because I interviewed them on my TV show.
What TV show?
And it was in their
did
contract. Well, it was me and this Senior Turtle that we started in Dallas, and it was such a terrific hit. All we did was host movies. And I'd say, hey, you're so fortunate, one of Hollywood's best movies tonight. And these are the stars, the so-and-so, and so-and-so. And the Mexican Turtle would butt in and say, Hank is lying to you. It's a terrible movie. Go to the other channel. You'll like it much better. And the viewers loved that.
A Mexican Turtle?
Mexican Turtle. It was called, we called him Senior Turtle. And Senior Turtle had already become a well-known still photographer. He was in another right place at the right time, and he was noticed by a very prestigious cinematographer from way back. And he was using my Senior Turtle to film something. He says, and he liked his technique and everything. I want him on my next picture. And my Senior Turtle was a Hispanic. He doesn't even belong to the union. Get him into the union now. And that's how his name was John Alonzo. If you look up John Alonzo on the computer, he made over 50 films. And if I read them off to you, you'd recognize a lot of those films. And he was. So basically, I got him to Hollywood. And so I can take credit for getting him to Hollywood. That's it. I don't take any more credit. And I kept in touch with him over the phone. I'd talk to John, how are you? I knew he was doing extremely well. And but his whole life turned to the bad way. He loved his work, obviously. He was good at his work. Made a ton of money. He divorced his wife, who I still talk to on the phone occasionally, send Christmas cards to. He totally ignored his family. Didn't go to his daughter's high school graduation, didn't go to this function, didn't go to anything. He married this other woman, whose name escapes me at the moment, and she was heavily into the business. She was probably a pivoting point in getting him into the big time as a cinematographer, because she had the connections, had the right kind of connections. Like you said, it's not what you know, it's the people you know. Now I know Ray, and I know Brian
right.
and I.
Yeah.
I know you guys. So they got a divorce, and then his life just seemed to go downhill, and he died in 2001. So he's long gone. But how this thing came about we were working for Channel 8 in Dallas. WFAA TV was the name of the station. I think it was an NBC station. But anyway, he was basically just a stagehand, and I was hired as an announcer on Channel 8. This is Channel 8 in Dallas, WFAA TV, a television service of the Dallas Morning News. That was my job. And so they had this one program on Channel 8 called Channel 8 Theater. And Channel 8 Theater was basically a movie show. I'm going to show you one of the best in Hollywood. And the ratings kept going down, down, down. And I knew that John had this puppet turtle, Senior Turtle. And we privately talked about, well, why don't we'd be a great host on introducing movies. So I went to management with it. Senior Turtle. They laughed me out, like, get out of here, you're out of your mind. But meanwhile, the ratings keep going down, 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 down. So I took another shot at it, and I went in. I'm basically a salesman, in case you didn't notice, Brian. So I went back into management, and they said, okay, we'll get in the control room, you get out there in the studio, give us a taste of what this hosting job is going to be, which I did. They fell off their chairs. They couldn't wait to get it on the air. And like I said, it was strictly ad-lib. There was no script, no teleprompter. I noticed you didn't bring your teleprompter today. So anyway, they couldn't wait to get it on the air. And the viewers loved it. They loved the contrast. I'd say, wonderful, it's a terrible movie, go to the other channel. So he was the voice of the viewer, really. And they loved it. We got fan mail, the ratings went, and that makes everybody happy because the advertisers are happy. More people are watching. It's the same old basic 2 + 2 is 4, you know.
That's right. Tell me, did you and Christine have children?
We had 3 children. We had 2 girls and a boy.
And what are their names?
There's the oldest, Elizabeth, named after her grandmother, Elizabeth. Ruth, named after my wife's favorite aunt, Ruth. And Charles. We lost Charles about 12 years ago. He worked with me in advertising. Tall, 6'4", good-looking guy. He
looked like his mother.
Obviously. Thank you. I'll get you for this, Ray. I'll find you. I'll find you.
What was the name of your advertising agency?
It was called Telad, which was focused on Yellow Pages, which is kind of history now. And we did, it was called Telad International because we had clients all over the world, basically. And we'd put them in phone books, in Yellow Pages all over America and Canada. And
you were selling the space in the Yellow Pages?
I worked with the publishers.
Hmm. Was that Rand McNally at that time, the Yellow Pages?
Rand McNally, that's a map company.
Yeah.
Well, there was a firm in Cincinnati similar to what I was doing.
Yeah.
That was the business, Telad International.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of fun with that. That was good. But people don't use the Yellow Pages anymore. They use computer.
Right. What about grandchildren?
Grandchildren, I have. Let me count them.
And this is going on camera too, you know.
What? Well, you're accusing him of being one?
We're videoing this, so you better know their names.
Oh, well, really? I didn't know we were videoing this. Yeah. So, let's see. Anthony, 2, 5 grandchildren.
I see, yeah.
And I now have 4 great-grandchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls. And the one of the latest great-grandchildren, he is very good-looking, because I'm prejudiced, very good-looking. He has more hair than 10 people. He should have gone directly from the hospital to the barber shop. Very good-looking.
The trait running through your son, from your wife to your son to your grandson.
Keep bringing my wife up. What are you trying to do here?
You're talking about the good looks. I certainly must come from your wife.
We'll be right back, folks. A word from our local sponsor. Word from our local announcer.
You know, I wanted to go back and cover a few other things about your experiences.
It's starting getting dark out there now. Go ahead.
Let's talk about Buchenwald a little bit more. Buchenwald, you said, was near Berlin?
Right near. It's southwest of Berlin.
And how long were you actually in Buchenwald?
Long enough to
in days, I mean.
Put all those in days, I'd say probably 3.
3 days. And what were your duties there at Buchenwald?
My duties at Buchenwald were to decide which ones we were going to put on the train. Those being the ones that were still alive and seemingly were capable of taking a train ride to the
rehab camp?
Rehab camp.
Where was the rehab camp?
That was somewhere in Hungary. I don't remember exactly where in Hungary.
And what other duties besides selecting the ones that go on the train?
I mean, talk about a wake-up call. Just we knew about these death camps in the war itself, but we were so busy staying alive and staying warm and staying well-fed. By the time the cooks brought the food up to the front, it was ice cold. But anyway, at 20 years old, to see that in person, the horror and the brutality and the people today that say that never happened are crazy. It happened. I'll go on record as saying it happened. And it was hard to realize that was really happening. And Eisenhower, he was offered a general. We have pictures. I don't want pictures. I want to go there. And I'm not 100% sure whether Buchenwald was the one that he went to. And I think on one occasion they had some of the local German townspeople to come in and look what's going on right in your own backyard. People that try to pretend that, well, I didn't know that was, I didn't know that sort of thing was happening.
Did they have the ovens there at Buchenwald also?
Did they have the what?
What, the ovens, were they?
Oh yeah. In fact, my wife and I, we were invited. We were invited by some Washington official party. They were going to fly us to, if we could get to Newark, New Jersey, they were going to fly us round trip, with all expenses paid, to Poland, to visit Auschwitz. And they had these golf carts ready for people like me who probably couldn't walk too terribly far, to take them from their transportation to Auschwitz. And Auschwitz came out of this whole thing as probably the most famous of the death camps. And we had lunch one day with, I had a CPA doing my tax work, and he had a cousin who was teaching at the Sorbonne, Paris, and he knew we were going back to Paris. We made another trip to Europe on a personal level. And we took her out to lunch. And during lunch I said, and she spoke mainly French, I had to speak German to her because she didn't understand too much English. And I asked her in German, I said, where were you during World War II? And she was Jewish. Pulled us up, Auschwitz, big fat number right here, written on Auschwitz. Wow, Auschwitz. And she said that one of the German guards took an interest in her. She was a pretty lady, and her friend, German guard, gave her some advice. He said, "Don't speak German anymore. Speak your native French, not German." And the guard said that we're more lenient, more easier on non-Germans, because they had some of their own people in there, the German Jews. So she started speaking started speaking French, and things went much easier for her, and she survived that. Obviously, she was having lunch with us, and she took us over to the Eiffel. Here we are on the main landing of the Eiffel. And she's pointing out, you see those buildings over there, and you see this over here. It was a perfect place to oversee Paris. You see those modern buildings over there? The Parisians don't like those modern buildings. They like to know the old-fashioned, the original architecture that they had before the war. Not that big, fancy, modern building. So that was interesting to have her. And my kids went up to the very top. I didn't feel like going to the very top.
When you entered Buchenwald, were there still any Germans there, German guards and SS people like that?
They were pretty much gone.
They
knew they were targeted with a capital T. And they had this one case, I don't know if it wasn't Buchenwald, but at one death camp they had a German guard hiding in with a bunch of the prisoners to pretend that he was another prisoner. And he stood out like a sore thumb because he was obviously very healthy, very, very fit, and he just, sorry pal, you're not going to pull that off. That's not going to work.
While you were there at Buchenwald, did they Did they actually have to do any cleansing of your body and stuff when you were there?
Not that I recall.
You weren't contaminated because they were worried about disease spreading as in
No,
some
they
of
did
the...
not with me personally. I know there was some of that. But I didn't touch on connected with the Holocaust and Buchenwald as a liberator. There were two of us locally, and both of us in Dayton. We were flown to Washington, and a bunch of others, totaling 120, showed up in Washington for the celebration of the 65th anniversary of the Holocaust itself, sponsored by the museum. They paid for everything. They put us up in a hotel where a lot of the congressmen stay for nothing. And I looked at the regular rate. I couldn't sleep. It was so expensive. I couldn't sleep in this place. that expensive. But anyway, we get there, and we all show up, and we're introduced to four-star General David Petraeus, who had some bad press after that because he got mixed up with some woman. But he was so nice. He told his aide, who was a full colonel, he said, I want to shake hands. There were 120. I want to shake hands with every one of those guys.
Yeah.
And when he shook hands,
thank you very much for what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. It's great.
I've never had such a sincere handshake in my life. And that was his order to his aide, to shake hands with every one of those. And we went into the Holocaust Museum, which was very depressing. I'd never been in it. Like I told Pat, it was terrific, terrible. And we had a luncheon afterwards. We had big round tables of about 10 people. Liberators, some of the prisoners were there. Surviving prisoners were there. The media was there. The military was there. So we had a full table. Guess who the surprise speaker was for that luncheon? The granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower. Delightful woman, a great speaker. I had my picture taken with her. So she's probably showing my picture all over America with her picture with Hank.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's my fantasy, okay? Don't laugh.
No question about it.
Don't laugh. So that was a big trip, and they paid for everything they had, and that's when I was hoping the President of the United States would show up, but he didn't. And the then Attorney General spoke at our banquet. We had the same table arrangements as banquet. They had a cocktail party beforehand, and they had this giant screen. If you can visualize that whole wall, bigger than the whole wall, they flashed each of the liberators' pictures up there. So I was a star for 10 seconds. That's my picture. Oh, you missed it. It's gone. They had it up on the wall for us. They made us feel important. So my hat goes off to the Holocaust Museum for sponsoring that. And there could have been probably many, many more liberators there, but they were either dead or they couldn't make the trip.
Mm-hmm.
And we traveled on the bus. I remember we traveled on the bus from the hotel, the fancy hotel, the Fairmont Hotel, for the record, Fairmont. And we had a big bus, and we were escorted by a police cruiser, not a motorcycle, a cruiser with lights, flashing light. So we made our way slowly to the banquet, and these people on the street corner, I wonder who the heck is on that bus that got this. So they rolled out the red. Talk about that. That's part of the red carpet.
You know, you mentioned when you were at Torgau, the Russian troops. How long did you spend there?
A couple of days. We were there at least a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days.
Were you on this side of the river or the other side when you were socializing with the Russians?
Probably on this side.
On this side?
This side. But you know, the Russians are a crazy bunch. I told you about the gal that tried to crush my body. They had this little game, you know, and there were signs every attention mines, beware, dangerous mines. And they had this little game that they wanted to play, whereby if you ran through this field of mines and didn't get killed or, you know, maimed or something like that, you got a prize. That was their idea of a game, where you could get killed in just this little mind game. Okay, go. Oh, you made it. Okay, you get a ice cream soda, whatever it was. Talk about a wild, and several languages. Achtung, meinen, dangerous mines. That was their game, and they had a lot of Mongolian troops, personnel with their unit. They were Mongolians.
Part of Russia.
Huh?
That's part of the USSR, yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the USSR.
Yeah.
And so that the meeting on the Elbe and the concentration camp. Those are right at the end of my experience during the war. And
have you stayed in contact with anybody that you were in the service with?
let me think. He's now dead, but toward the end of the war, we were in the Black Forest, and we're sitting around just chit-chatting, knowing the war was essentially over. And I had my helmet on, my steel helmet. I took it off. And for some reason I put my steel helmet back on. Right out of nowhere, this explosion. There's only about 3 or 4 of us. And it took this guy's knee off right in front of me. And he turned this color. First words out of his mouth, you want a cigarette, Hank? Yeah. He went into shock very quickly, and they pumped him full of morphine. That was the number one painkiller in World War II, was morphine.
What was it, a mine or something, or?
I'm losing my memory here.
Mortar?
Thank you. It was a mortar shell. We didn't hear it coming. No warning. No nothing. But my point is, if I had left my helmet off, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I might have been killed by the concussion or whatever. Because even then, my then steel helmet had dimples in it like a golf ball, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm lucky to be here, Ray, and I'm privileged to be here, and I appreciate this.
Well, we
just wanted to put
we've
that
had
on
a
the record.
We've had a wonderful interview, but at this time
I talk too much,
no,
right?
no. I have a feeling we left a lot on the table, but we also got a lot from you. But I wanted to see if Brian had any questions to ask you with an eye.
Uh-oh, here come the real. Here comes the real
Interrogation.
Well, Hank, I was wondering, when you were in the Battle of the Bulge, and what kind of coverage did you have? Trees, rocks, foxholes? How would you have,
protect yourself?
Yeah.
Well, we had the foxhole. We tried to get ourselves in that foxhole. We'd tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. I was amazed how many horses and cattle were killed. They'd be along the side of the road, rigor mortis, you know. That's a good question. Good question. I really don't have a perfect answer for you.
Would you just sleep in the foxholes at night?
Oh yeah, slept in the foxhole at night.
How many guys would be in a foxhole?
2. Kept each other warm.
Did you have a regular foxhole buddy, or did?
Well, we had a buddy. We were assigned buddies.
Who was your buddy?
What, his name, rank, and serial number? I don't remember. But
when were you already in combat by Christmas of that December?
well, I was going to tell you that story. Okay, the Bulge had officially, maybe unofficially, started. We knew what had happened. Oh, that's it. That's going to happen. I'm in a foxhole alone. And I told this story in front of an audience sometime. When I had a voice to sing, which I used to be a singer. Me and Vic Damone. Remember Vic Damone? He died. Anyway, I'm all alone in the foxhole. It's Christmas. And cold, hungry. I hear my mother's voice, you know. Well, Sonny, are you going to be home for Christmas? Oh, Mom. You know, I'm talking to myself. I'm going to be home for Christmas. Then I decided, well, at least I can sing that song to you, Mom. But not too loudly. I don't want to alert the enemy. I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me. We'll have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. Eat your heart out, Bing Crosby. I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dream. I actually did that in the foxhole on Christmas, alone. Because, you know, a typical mother, oh, you'll be back by Christmas. That'll all be over. So that was my excuse to Mom. That was my answer to Mom. Not going to be home for Christmas.
How were you able to keep warm? Or were you able to at all?
That's why I would have enjoyed that young girl I met today. Would like to have had her with me. Anyway, that was a constant problem, Brian. We were told, don't leave your boots on too long. You gotta get change socks. You gotta do this. You gotta do that. Dry them off. But a lot of guys, in spite of the advice, got trench foot. They had their feet amputated, got gangrene, and the paratroopers, they had the best boots. They had the quality boots because they were paratroopers. They needed that extra protection, particularly when they're landing. And a lot of them joined our unit after they stopped all that parachuting. And we could, you were a paratrooper. I could tell by your boots. I knew you. I know that. But keeping warm was a problem. But you know, like that night march I told you about with a guy that turned out to be a colonel. Some of us, including myself, we'd fall asleep walking That's how tired we got. Not enough food. We're cold. Like I said, the human body was tough. We found out how tough it was. Very tough. But after the war was over, Brian, the perfect coat to wear, the boots perfect. Ooh, everything was insulated after the war.
I was wondering, I think you mentioned you had some Germans who surrendered to you as prisoners?
Yeah, we took this one small town behind a tank, and we got in there and took the town. And that kind of scared me a little bit. We took some German prisoners, among some of our first, and one of them was a German officer. German officer was very impressive. The black boots and the uniform. I mean, he was spit and polish. But he was our prisoner. He had surrendered or something for some reason. He didn't have enough men to compete with us. And that was our first, just, gosh, we're capturing these people. I was so impressed with that officer. I thought he looks like the cat's meow, that's an old term, by the way, cat's meow.
Were you given any kind of training on that, or order, or some sort of
how to take prisoners?
How to take a prisoner?
Well, of course, the standard confession was basically name, rank, and serial number. You're not going to get anything else out of them. They're going to lie, or they're going to pretend. They're not going to own up to what they're really doing here, or what they had been doing.
Well, and like say if they had a rifle on them, where you have a certain procedure, you would have them drop the weapon, or
oh yeah,
go a certain
oh
way.
that was page one. Get rid of the weapons. And I had a beautiful. There were two Lugers. There was one for the officers and one for the enlisted men. And I got one for the officers, but somebody stole it from me on the boat going back. Was it you? No, you're too young.
You say you had shrapnel in your foot.
Yeah. I had some of my toes taken off this foot here. Looks normal now, doesn't it?
Well, explain how that happened.
Well, you had you had the 88 bombs. You had the different bombs and
artillery shells
and mines. It just happened. I didn't. I still was able to play tennis because the tips of the toes are off, not the whole toe. Tip of the toes are off.
From the shrapnel, because of the
so I don't have to file though. I don't have to cut those nails on those four small.
You consider that a benefit or something?
Huh? That's in my benefits. Yeah, they took that into my benefits. Yeah.
That's a Purple Heart ribbon there, isn't it?
Yep. That essentially was what it was for.
Yeah.
What it was for.
Did you have any trouble? You say you played tennis, but did you have any trouble? What happened after you got wounded like that? They didn't keep you over there in combat, did they?
No, I went back to the aid station. They took care of me.
And then what happened?
Well, then I was given to limited duty. They called it limited duty.
They didn't send you home.
No. Well, I still had points to satisfy over in Europe before I could come back to the States.
Yeah.
It was strictly a point system.
I see. Did this shrapnel wound happen before the surrender or after the surrender?
Oh, it happened during combat, when I was in combat.
Yeah.
So I had time to recover, and they
excuse me for asking that, because I kind of forgot where that happened at.
You want to know what city I was in at the time?
Or area, city, yeah.
Well, it was somewhere in, I think it was somewhere in the Ardennes, that area.
And that's where,
Now, the guy that shot himself in the hand, he didn't get a Purple Heart for that. But he got taken off the front line. He might still be alive today, for all I know.
so actually, after you went back to the aid station, they kept you in your outfit.
Well, I was to go back to the same outfit. I was taken away from my outfit
Right.
temporarily for medical reasons.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble with navigating
No, I adjusted to it.
Yeah.
The body will adjust. The body will heal itself whenever possible. The body will adjust whenever possible. I mean, that's life. You go through. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know.
I was wondering how much longer did you stay in Europe after VE Day?
I was there for about a year, Brian, getting the points.
After the war ended in Germany, you stayed over there that long?
Yeah.
What part of Europe were you in occupation time?
I was near Mannheim, which is near Heidelberg. Same basic area.
Mannheim?
Mannheim was very close to
And then,
Heidelberg.
so you got out in '46 out of the Army initially?
46, I stayed in the reserve.
Right.
Then I was
So-
called back to active duty later.
So, when did you come back to the States? Was that '46 sometime?
Yeah. And I got my job back. I was working for J. Walter Thompson, which at that time was the largest advertising agency in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and they took me back.
That's in 1946.
Yeah. And that's when I decided to stay in the reserves. And it turned out to be a happy decision because I got that assignment, which was inconvenient, but it turned out to be interesting.
And what year did that happen? You were talking about you with the NBC. And
That was in '46 when I went back to work for J. Walter Thompson. We had meetings at when I was in the reserve. We had our meetings at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, NBC Studios.
So, but when did you find out you were going to be activated again?
At one of those nice, innocent little Tuesday night meetings.
But when was that? Do you know what year?
Yeah, that was in 1951.
Okay.
But we only stayed in that unit until 1953. I got out of that in 1953.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about your your first time, before we, I wanted to talk a little bit about your time between 46 and 51 or whatever, but before I do that, I wanted to ask, you seem to, have a lot of, charisma and stuff. And,
Be careful now, Brian.
were you ever approached to be part of a USO show or anything like that? Were you part of that? Or did you get to go to one of those when you were?
I did my first appearance on network television. I was somewhat of I was a dancer, not really pro, but I was a good dancer. And I remember I applied. I heard they were casting a musical on NBC called The Bat, which was the English translation of Die Fledermaus. Die Fledermaus in German means a bat, that flies around. That's a Die Fledermaus. And the English translation was The Bat. That was the name of the show. They were casting for The Bat. So here's Hank.
And where was this?
In New York.
In New York. You're in New York at this time?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. And so I auditioned to be one of the dancers. I knew I wouldn't get anything else, so I didn't work out. Finally, I think he hired me to get rid of me. And so I became I think I looked good in a white tie and tails. That's what it was. They thought I looked good in white tie and tails. Other than this, because I clean up pretty good. And so he hired me on that basis. I didn't get paid much. I don't think there was much. And we had to rehearse the show in rehearsal studios in another part of Manhattan, not in front of the cameras. This was before videotape. This was before everything was live. I did everything live. And I appeared on that show. And I got pretty chummy with one of the female dancers, and but nothing ever came of it. But I appeared on that show. That was in 1948. And I remember my mother was back in Providence, back in Rhode Island. I saw you on national television. I'll never forget how excited she was that I was on national television. Of course, in my youth, I was still unrealistic. I thought that was the beginning of a big career as an actor. You know, it's funny how many things go through the young mind. What's the word I'm looking for? Fantasy. No,
Fantasizing.
Fantasizing. I was fantasizing my way through youth. And you're still a young man. You can maybe still identify with that. You know, we had these dreams. Whoa. Dances were in the beginning, Hank. And I remember being at the shows, they had cables we had to almost dance around cable wiring, you know. Oh, sorry. And, but it was a great experience. And it was the full NBC orchestra was there. It was the big time, you know, because it was nationally televised. I don't remember who the sponsor was, but.
Well, I know this is, I did have a question about your television career, you know, especially in Dallas. I mean, that was all live television, I guess, right?
Oh yeah, no videotape then.
Yeah. So
But I remember I had a girlfriend in California. I told her I was going out of town, which I was. I was going to Texas to visit some of my family. My uncle was still alive. And so, going out of town, and said, well, how long will you be gone? Well, I'll be back on the so-and-so. I'm leaving so-and-so. I'll get back on so-and-so. In the meantime, I was invited to make a commercial on something brand new called videotape. Go to volunteer some of your commercials, which they did. They recorded them. So I get back from my Texas vacation. She wouldn't talk to me. You didn't leave town. I saw you on television. I caught you. And then it took me forever to explain it was videotape. It wasn't a lie. I really went to Texas. It took forever. You know, the female mind want proof.
Well, I just got one last question, and then I'll let Pat probably have some questions for you. And then we can probably let you go.
I don't like that word, probably.
How did you make the transition from being like, you know, you're doing live television, you're obviously doing as a performer. How did you segue that into advertising and sales and starting and having your own company? How did that go about?
Well, I think a lot of it. I got tired of television. If that's possible. I got tired of television, and I was kind of down in my life. I was kind of down, and I heard about a company in Dayton, the Yellow Pages Company, the L.M. Berry Company, and I applied to the L.M. Berry Company as a salesman. And I was 39 years old at the time. And believe it or not, at age 39, I was borderline too old, because they like to hire people in the mid-20s, somewhere in there, so they can mold them into what they want. And I was offered another job in television. They wanted me to be sports director for Channel 22, which is still with us. And so I was torn between L.M. Berry and sales or television. And finally they said, we can't wait any longer. Do you really want this job? And I said, I think I'll pass. And thankfully the L.M. Berry Company finally called me, you know, after 100 years. If you're still interested, because they thought I was borderline too old at 39. So they were still interested, would like to have you on our team, you know. And I was so happy about that. Went to work for L.M. Berry. And I was excellent in sales because I knew how to make people feel important, and it worked like a charm. And and then somewhere along the line, they found out I could speak German. Sorry, Kane. Found I speak German, and they had signed a contract with ITT, Overseas Directories, which was still Yellow Pages. Next thing, I confessed that to a vice president, the guy that originally hired me at Allnight. He said, "We're looking for someone who can speak some German. We need to." I speak pretty good German. You do? Next thing you know, I'm on a plane to New York. And they sent me over to Europe, Germany, to find out if I really wanted that assignment or if they really wanted me. So I go over there, and I got the job, and that was exciting. I spent a whole year in Germany with my whole family, my wife and my 3 children. What an opportunity! And it worked out very well. And see, what else was I got? Was there some? Why did I tell you this story?
I was just curious about how you got into advertising and
that's how I got into advertising. And then from there, I decided to form my own agency, still doing the same kind of work as Ellen Berry was doing as Telad International, right?
What was the name of it?
Telad International, T-E-L-A-D. Telad International, and that's when my son was still alive and still working for me, and that was great. It was super. I was invited to be on the board of directors, and we made all these fancy trips to different parts of the country. The board, mainly to check out the facilities for our next convention. We'd wind up at these gorgeous, I think this is acceptable. It's fine, got my okay. But it was interesting, and we made a lot of good friends on that. And
well, thanks. I think
does that answer your story?
Yes, thank you. I think.
Can I approach the bench on that?
I think it's Hank's turn to interrogate you.
Hey, Hank, I met you before we came down here, but I'm interested, when you were in your occupation there in Mannheim, what was the physical surroundings like? Had Mannheim been bombed a lot? Was there fighting around Mannheim?
Now, did I say that I worked in Mannheim?
You had gone back there.
When did I go back to Mannheim?
Weren't you there during occupation?
Yeah, I didn't really work in Mannheim.
Were you there during the occupation?
Yeah, I was in Mannheim and in that general area, and also Heidelberg and some other places as well. They moved me around in different places.
Well, what was the terrain like? I mean, had Mannheim and those other towns been bombed a lot?
Oh yeah, they were all bombed, Pat. They all had some evidence of bombing, some more than others. The last trip we took to Europe was in 1990 when the Berlin Wall came down. And Chris, my wife, had never been to Berlin. So we made that trip, and we did go to Berlin. And the wall was down. Nothing through Point Check Charlie anymore. You could just walk from West Berlin to East Berlin. It was still more bombed. There was such a drastic difference between the condition of the city in West Berlin as opposed to East Berlin was still in the shambles stage as it was when I left after World War II. They hadn't done much reconstruction over there.
Really?
East Berlin was still a shambles.
Well, how did you have any interaction with the German people after the surrender? Did you have any personal contact with any of the German population?
Oh yeah, we had, yeah.
How did they treat you?
Well, they treated me well. In fact, I was reassigned during when they knew I had to serve more time to get my points. They sent me to Kassel, Germany, Kassel with a K, and I went from my present unit to another unit in Kassel, and I was the supply sergeant. They made me a supply sergeant because I was still a buck sergeant then until after I got over into the psychological warfare part of my life.
What were your duties as a supply sergeant?
Well, basically a supply sergeant. I was in an ordnance company as opposed to an infantry, from infantry to ordnance, to serve out the rest of my time. And I remember I had to take a monthly trip to a certain point in Germany, which supplied all of the PXs everywhere in every unit, all over Europe. And I had to have several volunteers with me to help me to get those PX supplies on this big truck that I was driving.
Didn't have some
2.5 ton truck. You had to double clutch it. I finally learned how to drive it. And they would fight to go with me. Why? Because they would always serve lunch when we got to pick up our PX rations for the next month for our unit. And guess who the chef was? The chef was Eisenhower's former chef, who made magic out of all the food. It was unspeakably delicious. It was almost vulgar.
How were the roads when you're traveling in your truck? Were they
Well, not
bombed out?
the best. They had damage everywhere. Damage was everywhere.
Yeah.
Some in more places than others. Now, Kassel was like a billiard table. The only thing you noticed was a staircase going to nowhere. You saw a lot of those staircases. They all went to nowhere. Kassel was a good example of ruins, war ruins in Kassel. I think it was leveled by the RAF originally. It was demolished. And
Well, I want to take you back to the Battle of the Bulge. Now, were you in that area when the Germans made their incursion, or did you come there to help defend there in the Bulge?
I came in to defend. I was not when they had the breakthrough because I was not there yet. It's after I got there that the Bulge materialized and became bigger and more threatening. Because the Germans, up to the end, they had every intention, every focus to win. And the German generals, history records that the German generals had the perfect plan that conceivably could have brought them the victory instead of the Allies. However, a man by the name of Adolf Hitler, he was the head man, and he wanted to persist and insist that his plan was the perfect plan. And unfortunately, his perfect plan was the wrong plan. And we're all still talking English in here today. We're not talking German. Could have been the other way around.
How close did you get to any German military guys when you're defending there in the Bulge? How far were they? A mile away, or were they half a mile away?
I would say the scariest sight in the world is when you know you're going to war, you know who your enemy is, and suddenly you see way off in the distance a helmet that is designed just for the enemy. It's a German helmet. That was as frightening as seeing the dead bodies, the white dead bodies. There's a German, they're going to come and they're going to kill me. That was their assignment. And toward the end of the war, all Germany had left were the old men and the kids. They had some kids on in uniform, fighting the teenagers. They were just kids.
Did they have those at the Bulge?
Oh yeah, toward the end of the Bulge, yeah, they had everything. They threw in everything they had left. There it is. That's all we got. And I remember I was cut off from my unit. This was also toward the end. It was kind of a scary time. I heard some German voices behind me, and I saw them off in the distance. And I scrambled into this barn house, and I buried myself in a giant pile of hay to hide from. They could have come in that way, and they would have picked me off. And guess who I had as company inside that giant pile of hay? You want to guess, Brian? Rats. But I made them my friends very quickly because I didn't want to make any noise, nothing. And I must have aged 10 years in that pile of hay, trying to avoid that group that could have picked me off. It was toward the end of the war. And on another side of things, when I finally got back to my unit, there were some wounded Germans, boys. You know who they were calling for? Their mother. When man dies, the mother comes to mind. Mutti, Mutti, Mutti.
Well, how long were you in that pile of hay?
Too long. Oh, I don't know.
Hours or a half a day?
I would say no. I'd say probably at least a couple of hours, maybe longer.
What kind of arms did you have? Did you have a rifle or?
I had a rifle. Yeah. I always had an M1. The officers in our army were issued a .45. Only one trouble with a .45. It's a great gun. Have you ever seen a .45? Right? They're very inaccurate. But if you get hit by a .45, you're usually dead. So the officers got rid of their .45 and took up with a carbine, which is a miniature M1, still 30 caliber, but a lot more accurate and a lot more protection than this.
Well, you carried an M1 Garand, isn't that correct?
Right, an M1 Garand, right, with
Right.
the chamber. You better get your hand out quickly, or the hand is going to stay inside. It had a boom, a clip of I don't know. Eight.
Counting the one in.
Yeah, eight plus one in the chamber, 8. That's it. And I went after the war was over. I went deer hunting with an M1, and there's a bunch of deer by that water hole over here. Aim, fire. I didn't have anything in the chamber. A click, just a little click. They all went scattering. That was the end of my hunting career.
Well, were you there when Patton and his boys came in?
At the Elbe. That's the only time I saw Patton. Was at the Elbe when Eisenhower came in, because it was such a historical occasion to meet the Russians.
What did the men generally think of Patton? Did he have a reputation among your group?
People, his troop thought the world of him. They cursed him, but they loved him. He was a good general. He was an entirely different personality than some of the other generals, Eisenhower included. And let's say he was respected. He was respected. Did you ever see that movie, Patton?
You said they cursed him. Why did he make them work too hard, or what? Why did they curse him?
Oh yeah, he was tough. He wasn't a nice guy. He was tough, and he was.
Of course, when you see that movie about him slapping that soldier, up until that
Well,
time,
that was unfortunate, I think.
was he before that? Was he considered a soldier's general?
Probably, Yeah, I would say definitely. Here's a,
Explain those stripes on your sleeve. Show them to the camera and tell the viewers what those stripes mean. And your red and
you see that?
Well, I see two diagonal ones here.
Each of these stripes, they count. Each one is worth 6 months in Europe.
What are these?
These are your service stripes. Each one is worth, I think it's 4 years. But this is a master sergeant, three up and 3 down, and this diamond in the center identifies me as what they call a first sergeant, usually the first sergeant of a rifle company. I'm the one that they brought all their problems to, you know.
And then your red and blue.
And this is the 69th Infantry patch that I was assigned to when I got over there, the red 6 and the blue 9. And on the other shoulder is the first Army. Courtney Hodges, he was a 3-star general. He was, and he was at the Elbe. He came to the Elbe. He joined. Well, logically, we were the first Americans to meet the Russians. And I don't have any more shoulders, Brian. That's it. 2 shoulders.
Now, I think you told me before we got on the camera that after the war in Germany, you were expecting to go to the Pacific.
Well, yeah, had President Truman, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt died when I was still over there, and Harry Truman, as vice president, took over as president, and before it came about that he was going to have to decide whether or not to atom bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Our next assignment, we were told, we were going to give it a pass to Paris or someplace. That was our next assignment. We weren't going to the States. We were going to go direct over to the Pacific and do that war.
Do you know where you were when you heard that the bomb had been dropped?
I really can't.
Still in Germany, obviously.
Still in Germany. And that had to have been one of the toughest decisions of Harry Truman's life. Drop that. But it turned out, a lot of people still criticize him for that. But it turned out it was the only thing to do. To stop all, how many thousands of other lives would have been lost had that not been done. And wartime has a lot of tough decisions. We had my platoon leader in World War II was a first lieutenant. Can't remember his name. He was a West Point graduate. I've never seen him, not before or since have I seen a more professional soldier. He was the first lieutenant. I never saw him sleep. I never saw him without looking like an officer. Spit and polish. And he left our unit after a while, and he was only been gone a couple of months. We saw him 2 months later. He was already a major. He had jumped the captain, jumped from first lieutenant to major. You know, I mean, he was a pro with a capital pro. And talk about making people feel important. He made everybody feel important and necessary.
We forgot to ask you, though, what company were you in? You were in the 272nd Regiment, but what company?
Company Charlie, C.
C?
C. And we used to have meetings every year. We'd meet in a different part of the U.S.
Have a little reunion with the guys?
Had the reunion with the guys. And I think the last one I went to, I think I was the only one from Company C. But I told Pat this, one of the last reunions I went to was right across the bridge from Cincinnati. In
The drawbridge?
at the draw. It's exactly where. Thank you, Ray. You were there, no? Okay, the drawbridge, and I spotted my regimental commander, who was he was not the commander, but he was one of the top people, and he was a major in World War II. And I went up to him. I saluted him. I said, "Sir, you probably don't remember me, because I was good looking in World War II." He couldn't laugh. He laughed for an hour. After. You sit at my table, we talk more, yes. So that was very,
Yeah.
but the group got getting smaller. One of the others we went to was in Virginia at Eisenhower's grave. What was the name of that one? Where the I'm running out of brains, Ray. We had a reunion there. We went to see Eisenhower's museum and his grave and his wife's grave.
Oh, you're talking
Huh?
about you're talking about MacArthur,
What did I say?
Eisenhower.
Forget it. Strike that, Brian.
Doug-
MacArthur.
Yeah.
And so each year got smaller and smaller and smaller, and we visited MacArthur's grave with his wife. Where would that have been? In Virginia. Where the I think the ship that
It's at Virginia Beach at Norfolk.
at Norfolk. We were in Norfolk, Virginia, and they had the ship that the Japanese surrendered on.
Missouri?
Yeah, Missouri was there. We couldn't. I don't think we were allowed to go aboard that. I wanted to, but that was one of the last.
Well, this is getting pretty long, but I have a couple other questions.
Is
Number
it still
one,
Wednesday, Brian?
You were at the military school when the atom bomb was dropped. Not the atom bomb, Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is what I was thinking.
Yes,
of.
I was a sophomore.
Okay, what was the feeling at the military academy when you learned of the Pearl Harbor?
Well, you know, it was a wake-up call, because we were all there because we were either going to become officers or we were going to stay in the military, and we were surrounded by everything in the military science and drilling and all that. It had a very strong impact for that reason.
Was there excitement that you might be using this training that you were getting, or was it, oh my God, war's facing us?
I would say both. And that was, as I told you earlier, I went into basic training, Brian, down in Macon, Georgia, and they were teaching me stuff that I used to teach in military school, and I had trouble biting the bullet on that and keeping my mouth shut. And one time, someone found out that I'd been to military school, and they said, "Okay, soldier, why don't you drill the platoon the next time instead of sergeant so and so or lieutenant so and so?" And I did that, and it was perfect. And they were like, "Well, show off."
How'd you learn the German language so well?
I didn't learn it that well. I learned it pretty well, enough to teach salespeople how to sell. I would say a combination of World War II, college. I took it in college. I don't think my German professor liked me. He knew where I'd been, you know. And a combination of all that.
All of us here know Dan Rather. What's your relationship with Dan Rather?
Well, none right now. When I got that man on the spot timing job with a major network television station in Houston as the program director. We had auxiliary studios in Houston, which were far more glamorous than our little studio in Galveston, because we had to have one in Galveston because the FCC, you have to have that in Galveston. Okay. We had this guy that used to come around and literally make ourselves miserable trying to get a job with us, Channel 11. And we finally hired him. He was good, but he was very abrasive, and his name was Dan Rather. He became a network television anchor with CBS. He wasn't supposed to follow Walter Cronkite. The guy that's on Fox right now, John, whatever his name is, the White House reporter that you see every night on Fox. He was the one that was supposed to succeed Cronkite. But politics plays out in every situation. But Dan Rather shot himself on the foot. He gave a phony newscast. I think during the Bush administration, the senior Bush, and they got rid of him. So where Dan is, he was supposed to come to Dayton to do something, but he was a good reporter. He took that story of that famous hurricane in Galveston. He grabbed a cameraman and headed to Galveston while the cameraman tied himself to a tree so he wouldn't be blown out into the Gulf of Mexico. It did this report right from there, and the network picked up. This is great. So that was part of his entrance into CBS, which was a giant promotion for him.
Sure.
But he showed his true color finally, and
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for your service.
where am I?
Well,
What have I done?
Well, you're not finished yet. You've got to take my appreciation and my thanks for this interview. And I personally want to thank you for your service to our country and your patriotism. And thank you.
Well, I hope it wasn't dull. I try not to be dull.
You're not.
Try not to.